Good morning, good afternoon. My name is Wabo Majavu, and I am responsible for how we commercialize new products in Africa, focusing specifically on mobile network operators. I would like to kick off with a video that shows one of our solutions for enterprise deployment.
Remote connectivity can bring enhanced operational efficiencies, deeper insights, and increased productivity to industries like oil and gas, rail and mining, even disaster response and civil defense efforts. But hard-to-reach locations lack the infrastructure to provide high-speed, reliable, cost-effective bandwidth for today's mission-critical applications. That's why Intelsat engineered FlexMove, an easy-to-deploy connectivity solution uniquely designed for comms on the move and comms on the pause. It enables capabilities like route optimization, autonomous vehicle control, predictive maintenance, natural resource exploration, and much more. As a fully managed end-to-end service, FlexMove guarantees resilient, high-performance connectivity through Intelsat's multi-layered Ku-band HTS satellite network. Delivery of services simplified through user-friendly terminals that can be rapidly provisioned and ready to use at a moment's notice. Solution providers can even deploy, reconfigure, and monitor network access through an easy-to-use service portal. It's all part of the dependable, real-time visibility and enterprise continuity that existing networks today just can't offer. And gigabyte plans are as dynamic as the solution itself, bringing value and scalable performance to your operations that's up to 20 times faster than current land mobile solutions for a fraction of the cost. Optimize operations and meet the demands of a world in constant motion with FlexMove.
Thank you very much. So the video shows how Intelsat supports business continuity, specifically for the enterprise sector. And I will be talking about how we bring connectivity, how Intelsat brings connectivity to remote areas. So areas where there is a lack of infrastructure and where they are currently unconnected to community. And the focus, or at least the tone of the conversation today, the discussion today, is really the commercial value behind the spectrum, both C-band and Ku-band, by looking specifically at the solutions that we've deployed, and also the impact both on the economy, business impact for the mobile network operators, as well as a social element. If we can please move on to the next slide. Okay, can we move on to the next slide, please? All right, so the first use case is the deployment of cellular backhaul in Uganda, two remote areas, specifically one is Bufundi and the second is in Toroko. So Bufundi is located about 7 kilometers away from the nearest business district. And while the terrain in Bufundi is beneficial for the crops and the farming activity there, when it comes to terrestrial or last mile connectivity, it does present a challenge in terms of the cost of deployment of the infrastructure. Toroko, on the other hand, nearby we see that the sites service a school as well as a health center or health clinic. And so both these sites are approximately 900 kilometers equidistant from Kampala, which is the capital. So what have we seen when we deploy these two sites? The one is obviously in terms of delivering connectivity to the farming space, but secondly, delivering e-learning to the schools in the surrounding areas. And then also what we've seen is the increase of mobile money usage. So what we notice is, together with the unconnected, we usually pair that with the unbanked. So the mobile money offers a cashless solution to be able to, transport money between relatives from the urban areas to the developing areas. Can we move on to the next slide, please? All right. Moving to South Africa, so we started with Uganda. Moving to South Africa, one of the applications that we've deployed is Wi-Fi over satellite. Now, what we've seen in the rural areas is that, where we have 2G coverage today, often the mobile network operators will ask themselves, is there a business case for upgrading of these sites to include 3G? So, the Wi-Fi solution is quick to deploy and also economical to be able to validate a use case for data deployment, data usage in these remote areas. But now, in addition to providing connectivity, what we have seen and are able to demonstrate is also the increase in economic activity, enabling of entrepreneurs or small to medium enterprises in these areas. And for our deployment in South Africa, this was in conjunction with the government, and it's termed Internet for Mzansi project, which is delivering data to the pockets of no connectivity or limited data access. So if we move on to the next slide, then we can see that in addition to your small medium enterprise in terms of economic activity, on the social side, we also see that together with the UN, providing connectivity to refugee camps where you have citizens being able to continue either education activity, upskilling of themselves, to be able to offer some kind of benefit or connectivity at the time that they are in the camps. The two solutions that I've spoken to, the first one is the Uganda, and then the second one, which is the Ghana. Specifically with these two solutions, we have deployed over C-band as well as over KU band. So in Uganda, for example, we uplink using the C-band, and then we downlink using KU band onto the remote sites. And also what we've seen is operators across the continent have legacy infrastructure or obsolete infrastructure, which is C-band compatible. And what we then able to do with this C-band, KU band deployment is reuse, infrastructure that, or at least still demonstrate value from infrastructure that has been obsolete by limiting the infrastructure or modernization costs. So really, this C-band, KU band play has been beneficial in that sense. If we move on to the next slide, please. All right, so how do we empower communities? So the concept of Wi-Fi, Wi-Fi over satellite, we see as a driver in building these communities and also establishment of smart villages. Now, a smart village will typically have some form of an internet cafe. Specifically with this project, Intelsat has partnered with Coca-Cola for the establishment of kiosks or eco-centers. And in addition to an internet cafe where the community can aggregate and make use of the internet connectivity, there's also clinics that are established nearby. And then there's also recharge centers. So where there is power, or at least there is off-grid power that is able to charge batteries and then disseminate those into the community. So, this is really a 360 view. So by planting or at least establishing a point of connectivity, we see this flourishing and enabling and growth, in the market in terms of the peripheral activities as well. If we can move on to the next slide, please. All right, so now we're moving on to the DRC. And, one of the pilot rural connectivity projects for Intelsat in partnership with Vodacom in the DRC was the deployment of 800 low-cost rural sites in the DRC. And there's so in terms of the uptake of data or data traffic, we've seen two things. One is the increase, or at least the dominance of 2G in Africa, and also the dominance of 2G as a revenue generator for the mobile network operators. And then secondly, what we've seen is off these sites, we start reaching congestion in terms of the demand for data services. And again, this is, applications like mobile money, applications like the banking for the unbanked. And so of these, we quickly start to see that establishing connectivity gives us, the vehicle to create the demand. Because then what you start to see a year, 2 years later is that as the traffic increases, so does the sophistication, for example, of the devices, where we start to see now an increase in 3G devices and the 3G utilization and congestions of these sites. And as we know, congestion does translate into revenue for the mobile network operators. And I think that, what is really important and really exciting to see is also the economy, the economic impact. So we can move on, please. All right. So Intelsat has also invested in a company, Amn Africa Mobile Networks. And here we see that we have deployed up to date over 1,000 sites in different countries. And so with Amn, this is one of those flagship projects where we've seen the value of low-cost deployment. So for these very remote areas where we have limited infrastructure, couple that with really low-cost deployment in terms of the infrastructure or the mast pole itself, together with off-grid solution or solar. And then also what we can deliver on a KU band is, low-weight antennas that really improve the economies, or at least the economics of deployment in these areas. And then also, when we compare with your terrestrial alternatives, what we're seeing is, in addition to reducing the time to market, because you're taking away the time to establish the civils, etc., for your high power masts, what we're able to see is that you can actually locate the site itself within or embedded within the community, which is closer to coverage for the connectivity, and as well as not having to worry about factors such as line of sight for these sites. We can move on to the next one, please. All right. Again, speaking of the improved economies, over KU band, we can really deploy low-cost antennas, and also, so these are the 1.2 meter antennas. And in addition to that, again, off-grid, cost-effective. And also when it comes to, if you look at your operational expenditure for MNOs, a significant amount goes towards power utilization, the resources for power, for off-grid power, such as, diesel, etc. And also the security of your assets on sites. And so what we've seen working with Amn is that the involvement of the community in the upkeep of these sites, protection of the assets on the sites, does increase or at least decrease the cost of running and operating these sites. So, if we look at 1,000 sites across different markets, namely Cameroon, Zambia, Liberia, Nigeria, this is a model that has proved success, but also a model that really has shown the ability to scale. Anything plus 1,000 sites generating revenue is really one area of application that we can say we are proud to be associated with it as Intelsat. Next slide, please. All right, so we've spoken about, different countries. I think now if we can speak about the sectors, specifically transformation within the education and the health space. So Intelsat has partnered with Mindset to deliver content both to clinics and also to schools. So this is educational content around health, around, education modules, specifically for those remote areas hard to reach. And we use our satellite capacity to be able to deliver or broadcast health and education channels, both within South Africa and also using the sub-Saharan footprint. If we can move on to the next slide. All right, and then finally, we'll talk about, how we empower or enable banks to operate across Africa. And our two key partners, in delivering connectivity to banks, specifically ATMs, is for FNB, where we have partnered with QCon as our service partner on the ground, delivering a managed service to the banks. And then also with Telkom, where we provide connectivity to the big five banks in South Africa, so Absa, Standard Bank, Nedbank. And, so there's twofold in terms of the bank application. One is, the redundancy that's provided for the branches. And then there's, ATM or transactional type connectivity to your remote areas, either in the outskirts or in petrol stations. And so, the partnering with managed service or turnkey provider, we able to demonstrate value to the customer by saying that, the management and operation of a complex satellite network is leave that to us with our partners, and we just deliver you a solution. So, all in all, I've spoken about the value, the commercial value of the solutions that we deploy over the C-band and the Ku-band spectrum. And again, in some of these activities or in some of these projects, we engage quite closely with the regulators in the different countries. I spoke about Uganda, for example, where we worked with the Uganda Communications Commission. And, I think that, as we move forward and starting to see an increase, particularly, when we talk about C-band and Ku-band, the conversations that we're having with the regulators together with the mobile network operators is around certainty of access, continued access to the spectrum, as we see, data increase, data usage increase, particularly for business continuity, critical operations. And as we can see now, these days we cannot speak about business continuity without mentioning the pandemic, which has really driven up these volumes. So with that, I think I will be able to take questions on the material that we covered. Any questions, we can open up. I believe we have about 5 or 10 minutes to take questions on the commercial value of the spectrum and the solutions that we deliver as Intelsat. Thank you. Okay, so there's a question from Annelise. I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly. So what percentage of sub-Sahara can realistically be reached by satellite connectivity? Can 100% coverage realistically be a target? So thank you for that question. And that's an excellent question. So when we look at the stats, so for example, when we look at the GSMA stats, we see that within Africa, we're currently sitting at 47% coverage of the population. And with our assets, we are saying that the potential exists for 100% connectivity simply because we already have coverage or already have illumination over all those areas. So now what is missing is the enablement or at least the establishment of those remote sites in those areas. But is it feasible? Yes. And then I think then in terms of, what is stopping us or what is blocking us to be able to reach that 100% target, We speak about the cost of infrastructure. We speak about, the difficult terrain. And then we also speak about the technology gap, which is the ability for the consumer to make use of the data connectivity once it's there and demonstrate the value for the mobile network operators. So yes, it's feasible, but I think that to be able to address it, we need all the stakeholders on board. So the regulators, mobile network operators, and of course the satellite providers. There's a second question. Is there a need for change in mindset so that satellite, mobile, unlicensed, and others are working together and not competing? Surely that would be beneficial for consumers. Okay, and then I think this question also comes from Annelise from Forum Europe. And then in terms of, okay, so a change in mindset. I think the way that I can address that question, thank you for that question, is, when we talk about mindset, I think that some of the barriers that still exist are around perception. The perception around, the cost of satellite deployment, and also the cost of the remote kits. And I think also there is a fear around the complexity of running a satellite network. So how do we respond to that? We respond to that, yes, by demonstrating the evolvement in the product that is delivered to be able to meet that cost point, especially for the rural areas. But in addition to that, where we bundle the bandwidth service together with services, so services of operating the network, services of maintaining and delivering transmission or connectivity as a service. So once you start delivering it as a service, then it really does go a long way in terms of alleviating all those concerns, and I think will actually assist in changing the mindset. So the mindset today is it's too complex, it's too expensive. We're saying this is what we as Intelsat have done to demonstrate that, and I think then it's about disseminating that and getting that understanding across. Okay, so there's a question here from Mohamed, and the question is, how has the COVID-driven... Oh, okay, sorry. How has the COVID driven the demand in Africa, and which applications have shown the most growth? Okay, so thank you for that question, Mohamed. So, in keeping Africa connected during the COVID-19 pandemic, we can say that, firstly, access to connectivity has drastically increased and has driven, enterprises, entities in all sectors to really start exploring alternative means of quickly deploying connectivity to the user's home. So we start to see with remote working, remote access that, government organizations, NGOs, private entities are really starting to migrate a lot of that user base, where previously you had terrestrial connectivity, especially in urban areas, to alternative means, so using C-band, using KU-band for VSAT networks. And, during these unprecedented times, where more bandwidth is needed, we've also seen the need to jumpstart new services to expand into the new regions and satisfy the growth. So I think the second part of the question was what type of applications? So we see an increase in cellular backhaul demand, so both on C-band and on KU-band, DTH TV broadcasting services, satellite news gathering, again, this is C-band and KU-band, the maritime and also aero communications, both in the, C and KU-band, And so while some sectors of the economy have been impacted negatively, we have seen that there is an increase for connectivity in previously unconnected areas, which really for us is good news and has increased the demand. Okay, we're open for more questions if we do have any. If there aren't any more questions, then I'd like to thank you for the opportunity. Okay. Oh, okay. So I see 2 more questions coming in. So a question from Joel Olanrewaju. Cellular backhaul Wi-Fi to remote areas. How profitable is this or your partners? Okay, how profitable is this to your company or your partners bear a large part of the cost? Or is it social corporate responsibility? Okay, Joel, thank you for that question. So yes, the use of Wi-Fi data over satellite is not significant if we look only at the bandwidth itself. But for us, it's really about firstly stimulating the communities to create a use of data which will then prove to be a demand in the future. So this is really a futuristic approach to say that create or stimulate the market today to then generate a demand tomorrow. And then in terms of the partners, one of the use cases that I spoke about where we partnered with Coca-Cola for the Eco Center. For Coca-Cola, it is a social, corporate social responsibility. And so, as we onboard more partners, they will have a social element to it. And really the economic benefit that we're quite excited to see is in the entrepreneurs on the ground. Some of the services that they provide, for example, we mentioned, reselling of power. We mentioned, kiosks, which is, a small shop that provides essentials to the community. A Wi-Fi center, so they're able to resell Wi-Fi vouchers. A clinic. So, when you start to create or boost economic activity, that lends itself to creating a user that has a demand, a requirement for data, which then starts to benefit, all the players in the ecosystem. The next question comes from Julius Akpaluk. And the question is, satellite connectivity for rural areas is certainly the way to go in bridging the digital divide. I want to know if you have undertaken any initiative in that regard in Ghana. Okay, so Julius, thank you for that question. 100%. So in terms of bridging the digital divide, especially for what I do, this is really the main focus, right? So tapping into that unconnected, tapping into, that potential that exists, particularly for our continent, where we still see, if we're talking 47% connectivity today, then it means, the delta is unconnected. And we're talking in the billions. And so speaking specifically to Ghana, we have worked, for example, with the GSMA Society, where we are looking at, different ways of bridging the digital divide. So what do I mean by different alternatives? Using space or using satellite is one mechanism. Using white space in partnership with white space. So you'd build a network as a mesh, interlink or interconnect the sites using white space, and then backhaul that over satellite to the MNO core. So this is one of the pilot projects where, different innovation to be able to reduce the cost of data is being piloted. And so, when we talk about, Ghana, that's just one example. And then also in different countries, we've worked quite closely with MTN across the different countries, supporting MTN with the rollout of rural connectivity. We've also worked quite closely with Orange and also with Vodacom across the different continents, across the different countries within the continent, speaking about rural connectivity, because really this is where the digital divide is still sitting. And, we cannot run away from the cost of deployment of these solutions. And so by partnering or at least innovating around the hybrid technologies that deliver the solutions, it definitely goes a long way. Okay. And then Mustafa Usman has got a question. What efforts are being made in getting satellite connectivity cheaper? Okay, so we've spoken about cost quite significantly. And, the delivery of satellite, we often talk about the economies of scale. So, we need critical mass to really start talking to a reduced cost per site of satellite. So if we see this, we start to see that satellite starts to make sense economically once you reach 40s, 50s, and even hundreds of sites. But anything below 30 sites, for example, will not be as economical. And why is it more economical? With terrestrial alternatives, for example, where we say that with increased distance from your last site or your last line of sight presence, increased distance does drive up your cost per site for deployment. And that's why we say the more sites you have, you're able to share resources across multiple sites and then benefit statistically from increased volumes. So it really is linked, the volumes or the number of sites as well as the cost. So as your sites increase, your cost per site will reduce. Okay, I don't see any more questions. I don't know if you want to give it 1 minute, 2 minutes to see if there's any more questions. I believe we have about a minute remaining. If not, I would like again to thank the audience for your time this morning. Okay, so there is one more question. Okay, and this question is, what impact has COVID had on projects that we are running? Okay, so I think we spoke a little bit about this earlier, where we said that if we look at the larger economic impact, certain sectors have definitely felt the impact more than others. And what we've seen is the change in behavior in terms of the users of the network. So specifically in the enterprise space, we have seen that with users working remotely, we have been able to enable pan-regional broadband networks. We've been able to provide critical connectivity for educational networks. We've been able to provide critical connectivity to oil and gas, as well as with the health space. Then we've also seen an increase in, DTH connectivity. We're seeing that a lot more people staying at home, needing to be connected. How do we deliver content to people at home that are now based at home as opposed to, the mobility back and forth between office and home. So in certain areas, there has been a growth. And then in certain areas, so for example, in the mobility space, there has been a reduction, but we see that increase coming from the additional data that has to be delivered to the user at home, extending that enterprise network to include the home. So incorporating all the characteristics of an enterprise network, the security features, the scalability, etc. So that's really the biggest impact that I can speak to. Okay, and then there's another question. What about overall impact on rural connectivity requirements? Okay, so specifically for rural connectivity, we have seen an increase in the demand. And I think that the only barrier that has slowed us down is the actual deployment. I mean, we've seen in the last couple of months with borders being closed, so transporting equipment into and out of countries has slowed down in that respect. But in terms of the demand, we see there's actually more demand than what we have been able to cater for. But with everything easing up now in terms of ability to travel, ability to transport equipment, and establish connectivity to those previously unconnected areas, we think that the COVID situation has actually boosted and driven or accelerated a demand in an area that would have taken longer to make an impact in. So I think that's the positive in this pandemic. Thank you very much. I believe that's all we have time for. Thank you. And any other questions, please feel free to send them via email. Our details will be shared for any follow-up discussions, any follow-up questions. And thanks again for your time.